Bruce Glencross was born in the early 1950s and was raised in Dorval, Montreal. Army has always been part of his life because his dad was a soldier and fought in World War II. When Glencross went to Ottawa in 1972 looking for work, he found out the reserves were still hiring and thought, why not? He was inspired by his dad and 4 years later was assigned to the UNF2 mission as a peacekeeper for the conflict between Israel and Egypt.
There have been tensions between Egyptian and Israeli communities for a very long time. In 1947, soon after the end of World War II, the State of Israel was created for the Jewish people. The Arab communities who had been living there were not thrilled about this. Both ethnic groups claimed that this territory, Palestine, belonged to them. In 1967, war broke out. Israel successfully defended their boundaries. Another war broke out in 1973, during which Israel managed to expand its territories. A couple of years later, though,
Israel, Egypt, Syria, and many more said yes to the UN troops to get involved. The UNF2 mission was created.
Classic peacekeeping methods were used, basically in one sentence. Two nations saying, yes, we want other nations' soldiers in between the two of us. So I went as a Canadian soldier in the Canadian Reserves a couple of years later in 1976, November 1976. So, oh my goodness.
A little while back.
Many years ago. And I was assigned as a driver from November 76 to May 77. And I had put in to do a 6-month peacekeeping course, and I did that 6 months, and I received this medal as a way of saying thank you to individual soldiers. The United Nations would give this to individual soldiers. And my job was at the United Nations headquarters, and I was a driver. And my main job description was to drive the chief logistics officer, a colonel, wherever he wanted. So my second and third roles in my jobs were simply maintaining contact with the main Canadian camp, about 3 kilometers away from the headquarters, a couple of times a day, and then maintaining the vehicle. I was a corporal in rank, and that was my work.
Bruce quickly understood that life in Palestine was not like life in Canada. Here's one example.
I took a wrong turn. They told me about it, and I went to turn around, and I went off the road, and all three of them just went nuts and told me, stop, stop, stop. He says, get back on the pavement as quickly as possible. Now do a 3-point turn on the road itself. And I said, why? He said, just do it. I did it. The Sinai has more landmines than any other place in the entire planet. So you don't go anywhere else except on the road. Ooh, I said, I promise from here on in.
I will stick to the road.
Stay on the road. So a little lesson in life. But.
In the late 80s, Glencross came back to the Canadian Forces in the reserves as a chaplain.
As a chaplain, I was trained to assist soldiers in figuring out whether they should go off to be a peacekeeper. Sometimes you might have heard of the phrase shell-shocked, and somehow or other, soldiers sometimes in the middle of a battle will get up and start walking around as opposed to protecting themselves or firing on the enemy. In 1967, in the Arab-Israeli War, the Israelis started studying their soldiers that did this kind of thing, and it became known as post-traumatic stress disorder. Asked to take a course in recognizing this and evaluating them prior to going over to be a peacekeeper or a peacemaker, and helping them make sure that they were doing the right thing. And then after they'd gone and come back, I would interview them again, not once, not twice, but 3 times in about 6 months. In looking back, what I found to be the most touching memory that I had, I actually took a picture. I took many pictures. And one of those pictures was of a youngster in Egypt. His clothes were quite bad and some ripped in some places and stuff. But he had this huge smile on his face, and that's what I remember about the people of Egypt, was that they were friendly, warm, smiling, hardly ever angry, and always looking to try and do their best.